Hi, I'm Judah Vitale, functional nutritionist, lifestyle coach, and heart math mentor. And this is the second video in a series that I'm doing on gut health and healing. In the first video, I walked you through the digestive tract. I gave you a little bit of gut anatomy physiology 101. In this video, we're going to go into the digestive process itself. And I'm going to walk you through the different phases of digestion. But first I want to talk about what is digestion. You know, when I was in school, we were taught that digestion is basically the process by which food is broken down into absorbable units. I never really connected with that definition. It just didn't really make the process come alive for me, because when I look at digestion, what I see personally is this miraculous process. I see this this process by which something that is not me, something that is coming in from the outer world, that I'm taking into my body and completely breaking down into its most basic fundamental units to where it cannot be broken down any further. And at that point, and only at that point, can the nutrients get absorbed through the intestinal lining and into my bloodstream, where they then become re-enlivened or even resurrected and become me. I just see that as such a miraculous process. You know, I came up with my own little definition of it's basically the alchemy of food for human incarnation. And alchemy is basically just a miraculous process by which one thing is transformed into something even greater. And that's really what we're doing with food. And human incarnation really just means endowment with human form. So we're taking one thing, food, and transforming it into something even greater, ourselves. And that to me is really the essence of digestion. And I find this to be such an important process, because this is what we're doing multiple times every day when we eat. And it helps me personally become more connected with food and more connected with the importance of digestion. So digestion, really, a lot of times we think it begins in the mouth, but the reality is digestion begins here in the mind, because digestion requires, it absolutely requires harmony between our autonomic nervous system and our endocrine system in order for the digestive process to occur properly. So if our autonomic nervous system is in a state of fight or flight, or anxiousness or nervousness, what that does is that actually minimizes, it impairs our digestive capacities. It reduces the amount of hydrochloric acid our stomach will produce, the amount of saliva we'll produce. It slows down gut motility. It reduces the amount of enzymes that the cells of our small intestine will produce, and it completely impairs the entire digestive process. But if we're in a relaxed state in the parasympathetic, which we call rest, digest, and repair, if we're in the parasympathetic state where we're feeling calm, relaxed, at ease, what that does is that increases the amount of hydrochloric acid that our stomach produces. It increases gut motility. It increases the amount of digestive enzymes the cells of our small intestines will secrete, and it enhances digestion across the board. Okay, so digestion really begins here. What is our perception of food? What is our relationship with food? How do we feel about the food that's sitting in front of us? Are we eating on the go, or do we take the time to sit down, take a few breaths, relax, express some gratitude for the food in front of us, and then begin to eat? That's going to set the tone for how well your digestion is going to function. So really, the first and most critical part of digestion is beginning here, and actually here, and how we feel, how we think, and how we feel about the food that's in front of us. So I really want to stress how important that is. Now, once we put food in the mouth, we begin to chew it. And we're chewing our food, and we have choices here. This is basically the only conscious process of digestion, is when we put food in our mouth and chew it, because we can determine how fast or how slowly we chew, how much or how little we chew, how fast or slowly or how rhythmically or arrhythmically we put food in our mouth. So this is all conscious process here. And when it comes to chewing our food, what I like to tell people is that you really want to chew your food a lot, because it gets to mix it with saliva. And saliva, as I mentioned in the last video, has antibacterial properties in it, but saliva also has digestive enzymes in it, like amylase. And amylase is going to begin breaking starches down in the mouth. So the more you chew your food and the more it mixes with saliva, what happens is you start breaking the food down, and you also increase the surface area of it. So I tell people, chew your liquids, drink your solids, meaning chew your food enough that is liquefied. And that increases the surface area, making it easier on the rest of the digestive processes as you work your way south through the digestive tract, and you get to mix it with adequate saliva. Once you swallow your food, it enters the esophagus, and at that point, it enters into the realm of the unconscious. You can no longer consciously control what happens to your food. You cannot speed up, nor can you slow down the digestive process at that point. And then it's going to go through the esophagus, and it's going to enter into the upper portion of the stomach. And in the upper portion of the stomach, it's going to mix with gastric secretions like hydrochloric acid, which is incredibly acidic. As I mentioned in the last video, it's about anywhere from a 0.8, usually around a 0.8 to 1. When you are secreting gastric juices specifically for digestion. And so what that's going to do is that acidity, plus there is a protein digesting enzyme called pepsin and pepsinogen, which it's the first phase of protein digestion that begins to happen in the stomach. And then as it mixes with the hydrochloric acid and gastric secretions, the lower portion of the stomach begins to churn the food. And at this point, the food begins to enter into something that is really unique to you, and that is your rhythm. Digestion has rhythm involved with it. So the lower portion of the stomach begins to churn rhythmically. And as you'll see, there's rhythm involved with the rest of this process, okay? Now, in the stomach, you really want to make sure you have adequate stomach acid, because one, it helps with the beginning of protein digestion. Two, because there's something called intrinsic factor, and intrinsic factor is what allows you to cleave B12 from your food and utilize your B12. If your stomach acid is weak, which I see so many times, it's a condition called hypochlorhydria, which is inadequate or weakened stomach acid. Then what happens is that begins to impair your ability to digest proteins and impairs the amount of intrinsic factor you have to cleave B12 and utilize the B12 from your food, which can lead to B12 deficiencies, which then that's going to have a variety of other impacts on your system. Now, the other thing that's important about the acidity of the stomach is that it's the acidity of the stomach that when the food that is now churned and mixed with hydrochloric acid is turned into something called chyme, C-H-Y-M-E, that chyme and is really acidic, and it gets released into the small intestine, and with that acidity hits the small intestine, that triggers the pancreas to release pancreatic juices as well as sodium bicarbonate. And so that if the stomach acid isn't strong enough, you don't get a strong enough trigger to the pancreas, and you get inadequate pancreatic juices, which is going to further impair your digestion. So you see, it's all kind of connected up the chain and then down the chain. So now the chyme gets released into this upper portion of the small intestine in rhythmical waves, okay? The pyloric sphincter opens and a little bit of chyme gets released and it closes. Then it opens and a little bit of chyme gets released and it closes. So there's this rhythmical opening and closing that happens. And then in the upper portion of the small intestine, known as the duodenum, is where the final act of chemical digestion, meaning enzymatic secretions, happens. And that's where really your final phases of carbohydrate digestion, protein, as well as fat digestion occurs there, because what happens is the pancreas is releasing pancreatic juices through the pancreatic duct, and then the gallbladder, which is a bulbous shaped organ, it kind of looks like a baby aspirator, it gets triggered by a hormone called cholecystokinin, CCK, and fats stimulate the contraction of the gallbladder, and that secretes bile down the bile duct. So I know this is a little technical, but it's just kind of nice to know this because you can see the concert that's happening here, kind of this symphony that's occurring here, is that the pancreas releases pancreatic juices, the gallbladder releases bile, the bile and pancreatic juices come into the small intestine, the cells of the small intestine release their digestive enzymes. So now what you have is you have carbohydrate digesting enzymes, you have protein digesting enzymes known as proteases, and then you have fat digesting compounds or emulsifying properties that come in and break your food down into its most basic fundamental units. And what's so important about this is because in order for optimal digestion to occur, in order for you to extract the maximum amount of energy from your food, to get all the nutrients you can from your food, you want to make sure that it's fully broken down into its most basic fundamental units, that it's stripped of all of its inherent properties. And at that point, and only at that point, can those nutrients cross the threshold of the outer world of the digestive tract and enter into the inner sanctum of the blood. And the amino acids that used to be protein and the glucose molecules that used to be starch get absorbed via your digestive capillaries, and they go through the hepatic portal vein into the liver. Now, the hepatic portal vein, I just think that's such a wonderful term for this, because a portal, if you look at the dictionary definition of a portal, it is the gateway to something sacred or holy. And what happens in the liver is that the glucose molecules and the amino acids go through the hepatic portal vein into the liver, where then they get re-enlivened with your own unique properties. They become you. The fatty acids and glycerol molecules get absorbed via the lymphatic capillaries and eventually make their way to the liver. This all occurs in the jejunum, which is the next portion of the small intestine. So you have the duodenum, where the final breakdown of your food occurs, and then the nutrients get absorbed in the jejunum through villi, which are these little finger-like projections that move in rhythmical wave-like motions, and the chyme was moving through your small intestine in a rhythmical fashion because the intestines have muscles. It's called peristalsis, and it's a wave-like muscular action that moves the chyme through the digestive tract in rhythmical waves. And then the villi look like little finger-like projections, and they move like coral in the ocean. You could, if you can just imagine that, right? And they're sensing. They have nervous system. They have nerve tissue. They have digestive capillaries, and they have lymphatic capillaries. And what they're doing is they're sense-perceptive organs for nutrients, and they're seeking out nutrients. And when they find them, the nutrients get absorbed through little microtubules in those villi. Now, these villi are so important. We have, as far as surface area of villi, we have a tennis court's worth in our small intestine. And why they're so crucial is in a lot of gut issues where there is, say, a lot of inflammation, say somebody has celiac disease, gluten sensitivity and they don't know it, and every time they eat wheat or gluten, it's triggering an immunological response, and that begins to atrophy the villi of the small intestine. And what begins to happen as the villi atrophy, that's decreased surface area for nutrient absorption. So malabsorption issues begin to occur when you have the atrophy of the villi. So we're going to go so much further into this because this is where we start to get into leaky gut. Okay, we're intestinal permeability. So I'm going to walk you through this a little further in another video. The next step that happens after nutrient absorption is that you have fiber, which is undigestible. You have fiber, you have water, and you have remaining bile salts that were used for the digestion of your fats, all moving through the small intestine, eventually into the large intestine. And when the fiber and bile salts and water enter into the large intestine, some of the water gets reabsorbed, some of the bile salts get reabsorbed, some stay bound to the fiber. And then in the large intestine, where you have thousands of different species of bacteria and literally trillions, I believe there's something like 100 trillion bacteria on average in your large intestine. It's one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world is your large intestine. When you have good healthy fiber, lots of fiber, good fiber in your large intestine, then what that does is that feeds the good bacteria in your gut, and the good bacteria will begin to ferment some of those fibers and produce really important nutrients like short-chain fatty acids that are essential for the health of the colon. They help reduce the risk of colon cancer. They provide energy to the cells of your colon. You get the manufacturing of vitamins like B12 and vitamin K. So this is really important. And then as that process goes on, the fiber creates the bulk for your stools. And this is where the digestion begins to exit out of the unconscious and come into the realm of the semi-conscious, where you now are aware that you might have a bowel movement. And that bowel movement, you can either let go or you can hold it. So it's semi-conscious, preferably let it go. And as far as healthy bowel movements, 1 to 2 a day, preferably as many times as you eat. A teacher once said to me, if 3 trains pull in, 3 trains should pull out. And so I just think that's just kind of a great rule of thumb. And that, in kind of a nutshell, is the process of digestion, beginning with ingestion and ending with excretion. And so there's so much more to go into. I'm going to go deeper into the small intestine. I'm going to go deeper into some of these digestive processes, the importance of bile, the importance of healthy intestinal integrity, intestinal lining integrity, what happens with intestinal permeability, what happens with poor digestive forces in the next videos. So if you'd like to learn more about what I have to offer or how to work with me, just go to the link below at judahveitel.com. If you have a question or a comment, put it below. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And I very much thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a nourishing day.